One of Marilyn's female friends had found herself alone with Bobby at a party, and next thing she knew, he had locked the door and pushed her down on the couch. But that wasn't Marilyn's Bobby. The general, she said, always took her calls at the Justice Department, no matter how busy he was. He would sneak off on trips to LA and pull up in his white 1956 Thunderbird and spirit her away for evening strolls on the beach, just the two of them. Good morning, you guys. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and I'm so glad you're here. We are working our way through Maureen Callahan's book, Ask Not, the Kennedys and the Women They Destroyed. And today we are wrapping up the story of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn filed for divorce from the playwright Arthur Miller on January 20th, 1961, the day Jack Kennedy was inaugurated. It was a victory for Marilyn, a liberation from a man who had made her feel dumb, and a repatriation of sorts. This isn't a slam against divorced people. There are necessary divorces. So I just want to say that from the get-go. I just think that each time we see her, she's barely been married to a person, and then she's getting a divorce, and she's seeing it as a liberation. And I just think it's terribly sad that her marriages were things that she felt like she needed to escape from. You know, even if you go through that once, there's an opportunity there for learning, but she's now gone through it twice. Just an observation. I know we all know that. I don't want to, pile on this woman, but I do think, like, when you go through something that's so awful, and whatever it is, if your judgment has been proven poor in an area, that's an opportunity to sit and ponder what went wrong back there. What was that? Rather than barreling ahead. But people try to get her to slow down to see it, and she just keeps barreling ahead. So what if Jack had disappeared during the campaign? Marilyn had problems. She knew that. And their affair threatened his chances of becoming president. Beyond all that, she remained in love with Jack. He was more than the leader of the free world. To Marilyn, he was her cult leader, her guru, her ruler. She was the submissive, and he was the dominant. She had told her psychiatrist as much. This man is going to change our country. I tell you, doctor, that when he has finished his achievements, he will take his place with Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt as one of our greatest presidents. I will never embarrass him. As long as I have memory, I have John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Marilyn had believed Jack when he said he would leave Jackie and marry her, that she would be First Lady for his second term. It wasn't so crazy. Marilyn had had Jack on the hook for years. She was like a photo negative of Jackie. White hot blonde, pure sex, a global supernova. The men who married her sought to possess Marilyn, to annex and control her. She was meant to redound to their stardom, to ratify them as alpha males, the rarest of the rare who could satisfy the world's most desired woman. But that was all image and fantasy. In truth, these men were insecure and jealous. Their only means of trying to keep Marilyn to themselves was to shame her. Jack Kennedy did not have that problem. He relished Marilyn's sex appeal. He admired it. In Marilyn, he saw a feminine version of himself, greedy for sex, yet taking no pleasure in it. Jackie didn't know all this, of course, but she knew enough to understand that Marilyn was dangerous. I think it's so sad to read behind the scenes the ways that these people, both of them, both Jack and Marilyn, were known, or now are known to be, highly sexual creatures or highly sexualized creatures. And yet they really had none of the actual marrow of intimate relationships with others. Perhaps both of them, because they wield it like a tool. His is like a clunky, like, hey, there's a nail, I'm going to go ahead and hammer it. We've been told in previous chapters, he just uses it as a task to get out of the way in the middle of all the things. And he'll do it regularly with whoever happens to be there. For her, it was a tool she was using to find validity in the world, to find her value. Of course, she used it as something to climb up the ladder. But neither one treating it with that delicate respect and care that it deserves, as something that's very, very powerful and very enjoyable, but also private, and something to be carefully granted to someone within covenant. Instead, it's just doled out by each of them in ways that are cheap and that they don't even realize is cheapening them. The dress. This was going to be the biggest night of Marilyn's life, performing for Jack at Madison Square Garden, a fundraiser under the guise of his 45th birthday. This seemed proof of Jack's intentions. He was edging closer to making their romance public. Without saying a word, she could out them to America. And what a headline! Marilyn Monroe, the biggest movie star ever, and the President of the United States. She wanted to look like Marlene Dietrich in one of her sparkly souffle gowns, but sexier, edgier, and more risque. So Dietrich, who interestingly had been a lover to old Joe and even to Jack himself, sent Marilyn to her designer, the great French costumer Jean-Louis. For Marilyn, he conceived a gossamer, flesh-toned dress glittering with thousands of hand-sewn rhinestones, so figure-hugging that it had to be sewn onto her body, so tight that she couldn't wear undergarments. If you guys didn't know this dress had been under lock and key for decades. It was recently worn, I think a year or two ago, by Kim Kardashian to some awards ceremony. And it was a big scandal because supposedly the dress was damaged by Kim Kardashian because she couldn't zip it up all the way or seal it up all the way because she's got different proportions. And anyway, this is the same dress. When the garden lights hit her alone on that stage, Marilyn was ablaze with carnality, yet somehow purified by all those tiny fake diamonds. Half an hour earlier, she had been in her dressing room, alone with Bobby Kennedy for 15 minutes. Both Kennedy brothers wanted her, and she, both of them. Jack, of course, had power, but Bobby had a seriousness that eluded Jack. She wanted some of that gravitas for herself, and Bobby could be kind. The first time they had met, at a private dinner party in LA, Marilyn had stashed crib notes into her handbag, facts about world events that otherwise eluded her. Bobby noticed, but said nothing. Marilyn's lack of cynicism, her eagerness to please, was poignant. I just feel like I need to say, I've checked the back notes. So Miss Callahan has pages of notes in support of each chapter. And so when there's something that I'm like, I don't know about that, I go back to the back notes to look and see, did she have that firsthand source for this? Is this common knowledge that was referenced in such and such? There's nothing in the back about this idea that Bobby was there 15 minutes beforehand and that she had something with him right before going on stage. And I just want to say, not only that there's no sourcing, but also that she had to be sewn into this dress, that it's a gossamer, delicate dress that couldn't even manage having undergarments under it. I don't know. What do you guys think? I kind of call that into question. There's nothing cited. This is new information. And I just wonder if this is literary exaggeration. I'm not sure, but I just kind of want to put that out there. Late to the stage, drunk and flush with fresh transgressive sex, maybe, her dress so tight she could hardly walk, Marilyn approached the podium swathed in a white mink stole. She handed her mink off to her escort, flicked the hot microphone with her finger, and moved to the side, revealing herself. 40,000 people reacted like a single organism, including the president and everybody seated in his box, from which Jackie, presciently, was absent. You could just smell lust, was his friend Hugh Sidey's description. The president, he said, had gone limp with desire. Marilyn cooed happy birthday as if it were the greatest come on ever written. The president was left slack-jawed, but regained his wit, taking the stage with one intent: acknowledge, but minimize. I can now retire from politics, he told the crowd, having had happy birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way. He laughed. The crowd roared. Later that night at the private after party, in a clubby Manhattan room filled with mahogany bookshelves and important men, the only known photo of Bobby, Marilyn, and Jack was taken. Marilyn stood between them in profile, looking serious. Bobby and Jack turned themselves away from the camera. So I'm going to show you guys that photo. We have Bobby here close, Marilyn in the middle, Jack with his back to the camera. After that night, Jack faded from Marilyn's life. She didn't know about the ultimatum Jackie had given him, but she did not like being frozen out. It triggered her worst fear: abandonment. She would try the White House, but was never able to reach Jack. Instead, another Kennedy was suddenly making himself available to Marilyn: Bobby. When he came to LA to visit his sister Pat and her husband Peter Lawford, Marilyn was often there. Of dancing with Bobby, she wrote to her friend, "He was very nice, sort of boyish and likable. Of course, he kept looking down my dress, but I'm used to that. I thought he was going to compliment me, but instead he asked me while dancing who I thought was the handsomest man in the room." Y'all, this guy is with Marilyn Monroe, and instead of giving her his attention, he's clamoring for hers. It just sounds so immature. He's looking down her dress. I mean, put this in context. He's in his 40s. She's 35. He's married with a lot of kids. She's been with his brother, and he knows it. And he's looking down her dress like they're 16, and he's saying, "Who do you think is the most handsome man in the world?" It just seems so dumb. This seems so juvenile to me that these important people were interacting this way. And it makes me sad that she's still getting the same stupid response to her sex appeal. She still doesn't have somebody who's able to take her in stride and totally find her desirable and interact with her as a human instead of just as a reflection of their handsomeness. Bobby and Jack had overlapped in Marilyn's bed, as had Jack's friend Frank Sinatra. Her psychiatrist was worried that Marilyn was way in over her head, but felt it was equally dangerous to discourage her. Marilyn had never felt so seen, so wanted, so gratified. Despite her enormous success, she still primarily defined herself through men. In January 1962, when Marilyn bought her dream house at 5th Helena Drive, a cozy hacienda with her longed-for swimming pool, she cried, not tears of joy. I felt badly, she said later, because I was buying a home all alone. So she is still dreaming of a domestic life with someone who loves her and who she loves. Of course, well, she and Bobby had their own relationship, and she thought he was a better version of Jack. His sense of purpose, his deep belief in the civil rights movement, his righteousness, and his intellect. She had been so humiliated when, at a dinner party with a famous heiress, one guest called Marilyn out for her improper grammar. She had left that table in tears. Now she studied even harder to improve her vocabulary. For Bobby, she wanted to use big words to express big thoughts. Listen to this. This is so weird. I want to talk about this with you guys a little bit at the end. His sister Jean gave Marilyn the Kennedys' enthusiastic endorsement in a handwritten letter. "Understand that you and Bobby are the new item," she wrote, ! "We all think you should come with him when he comes back east, ! This is the second youngest Kennedy. She's right above Ted, between Robert F. Kennedy and Ted. So she's there in the middle, Jean. Marilyn still had feelings for Jack. She would come see him from time to time, but Bobby could make Marilyn a great woman, and none of her friends could talk her out of this next delusion that Bobby would leave Ethel, mother to his 7 children and counting. What Marilyn could not see was that Bobby was not interested in strengthening her. Instead, Maureen Callahan describes the process that gold has to go through to make it more pliable. She says their goal was to heat her up and then leave her alone to cool down to make her more pliable, bendable, easier to manipulate. Now, I want to say we have definitely seen manipulative behavior and we've seen predatory behavior from Jack in particular. My guess would be that these men did not realize this is what they were doing. I think they would have thought they were taking advantage of the moment, enjoying a little rendezvous, but then they go back to their normal life. I don't know that they are actively thinking, I'm going to leave her alone and that will actually wear her down. I think they each have busy lives and they're going back to them, but then she's stuck with the memories and desires that they've left her with. I'm just not sure how much of it was premeditated. You guys can tell me what you think. Marilyn's psychoanalyst consulted with colleagues. Above all, he wrote, I try to help her not be so lonely and therefore escape into drugs or get involved with very destructive people who will engage in some sort of sadomasochistic relationship with her. End quote. Almost everyone in the Monroe Kennedy social circle knew of her entanglements with Jack and Bobby. The men were titillated. Everyone but DiMaggio. He thought the Kennedys were using Marilyn, and so did the women in Marilyn's circle. The wife of Dean Martin, in particular, was none too impressed with the way Jack and Bobby conducted themselves at Hollywood parties. She found the brothers juvenile, boorish, and way too aggressive with women. Yeah, she would, because she's used to people with finesse and who have acted and who have they've had others at least write good words for them of how to approach women. Or they've been in the room as films are being done. So she's been in a circle with people who at least, even by secondary sources, have been informed about how to kind of finesse and romance and engage with a woman. And then she's just dealing with Jack and Bobby, who just walk into rooms and either immediately move into sexual activity or who say things like, who do you think is the handsomest man in the room? Like, no suaveness, no subtlety, just direct to the point, and they don't like it. One of Marilyn's female friends had found herself alone with Bobby at a party, and next thing she knew, he had locked the door and pushed her down on the couch. But that wasn't Marilyn's Bobby. The general, she said, always took her calls at the Justice Department, no matter how busy he was. He would sneak off on trips to LA and pull up in his white 1956 Thunderbird and spirit her away for evening strolls on the beach, just the two of them. She taught him how to do the twist. He asked her to call his father because he knew few things would impress the old man more than a call from America's #1 sex symbol. That is so twisted. Normally, if you're doing horrible things as an adult and your elderly father is somewhere else, you would try really hard to make sure that your elderly father doesn't find out that you're doing these horrible things. Instead, he's proud of it and flaunting it. It says a lot about old Joe. She felt a ton of influence when she had these visits. I do want to say that when I was a political science student, the way these things were explained was that Jack and Marilyn were still having their affair and that Bobby was the one managing it, so that he would take the calls, he would set up rendezvous for them. So until I heard the interview with Mrs. Callahan, I hadn't encountered the idea that the two of them had a secondary and sometimes simultaneous affair. But it does seem she does have some sourcing for that. It sounds more like the psychiatrist was aware that she had relationships with multiple powerful men, but I don't know that they are named by the psychoanalyst. So I think the primary source that she has for this is one book called Goddess by Anthony Summers. And so she takes a lot from that. So just for your information, that's where that comes from. Oh, the influence she felt from these meetings. If only it had a way of sticking. When Bobby went back to his life in DC, back to his wife and children at Hickory Hill, Marilyn, ever insecure, began floundering. She would drink champagne from morning till night, pop pills, and stop showering. Neither Kennedy was ever far from her mind. In 1962, Marilyn listed the people she most admired: Eleanor Roosevelt for her devotion to mankind, Carl Sandburg for his poetry, and President and Robert Kennedy. They symbolized the youth of America in its vigor and its brilliance and compassion. In March 1962, 14 months after she had filed for divorce from Arthur Miller, he remarried the set photographer from The Misfits, a movie that he had written for Marilyn. Arthur had replaced the most famous woman in the world with a crew member. She took to calling herself a negated sex symbol. So here's this man who's not particularly desirable to the average person, and he has now divorced Marilyn and married some random crew member on a set, and she's just like, oh, I guess that says something about me. A few weeks later, the president came around again. Had he sensed her despair or her vulnerability? She was falling in love with Bobby, but still loved Jack too. When he flew into Palm Springs in March of 1962, she spent a secret weekend with him in a cottage on an A-list star's estate. A certain young White House intern was along on that excursion, coming down from an involuntary drug trip inside the main house. Neither the intern nor Marilyn knew of the other's presence. Not that it would have mattered. There was no therapy session or drug or starring role that gave Marilyn Monroe the high of knowing that the president still wanted her. During that liaison, she made sure that one of her best friends spoke to Jack on the phone. Proof that it was real, that it really happened. A witness if he ever tried to deny it, if he ever called her crazy. Then Jack was off, and Bobby returned, and Marilyn's sense of potency started giving way to suspicion. Was she being used? Were Jack and Bobby having some sort of proxy war, some incestuous sexual competition? Underneath all the stealth and glamour, did they both just think she was another disposable blonde? Was this a game to them? Was she just a pawn? I mean, yes, of course she was asking herself these questions, and of course that is part of what was happening. She might not have had every insight into all of their motives or lack of motives, maybe just pure instinct that they were operating out of at certain points. But she certainly had intuition and emotional insight fueled by her psychoanalyst who had already asked her some important questions. This made me think about the way that every human is endowed with a conscience. We are all given this capacity to internally review the things going on in our lives and have a sense of leaning of which thing is right. We might call that thing our conscience, we might call it our intuition or our emotional intelligence. But even with Marilyn's damaged past, that doesn't actually mean that she wouldn't have insight into these things. In fact, she, from having been passed from foster home to foster home and from abusive situation to abusive situation, she actually, in her own being, carried insights into the ways that people who are trying to overpower or use another might behave. Now, did she listen to that? Did she notice that? Was she able to make the connections? We don't know. But she has these powerful men playing for her affection. And Maureen Callahan points back to this abused preteen who had gotten one message from the men in her life: you are worthless. Yes, sometimes Bobby and Jack could make her feel that way, but when she was with them, she felt quite the opposite. She felt worth very much indeed. Her psychoanalyst warned her, conduct these relationships with the Kennedy brothers because you want to, because you find something valuable, but be careful. Don't have sex with one or both of these men because of their power. Don't have sex with them because you think you should. I know y'all aren't coming here for me to preach at you, and I'm not going to preach at you. I'm just going to say that the Christian and even the Catholic view of the purpose of sex gives so much more meaning and kindness and intimacy and delicacy around the subject of sex than these three people who are powerful and in these sexual relationships, and also more than this psychoanalyst is saying, like, just have sex because you want to, not because you think you should, not because of their power, but, you know, because you find something valuable. And, you know, sex is too powerful to be used lightly. And this is definitely a light and trivial use of sex. And so it's worth pondering, since we're talking about America and the world's top sex symbol, that the recipe that she actually lived out, but also that she was given by everyone around her, from husbands and boyfriends to psychoanalysts, all lacks the care and the delicacy that it ought to have for something that's this important and affects us so deeply. Dr. Greenson underestimated how little control Marilyn actually felt when it came to the Kennedy brothers. She was about to be named Female World Film Favorite at the Golden Globes, yet she was despondent, in part because she couldn't celebrate with Jack or Bobby on her arm. She had actually become a liability on set, holding up production of her latest film, which was Something's Gotta Give, with her persistent inability to get out of bed. When she called in sick and showed up instead at Jack's Madison Square Garden birthday fundraiser, that had not endeared her to the studio or to her director. She was on the verge of getting fired. So then when she goes to the Golden Globes Awards ceremony, she baby steps her way to the table, and she was completely drunk. She wants out. And this unraveling alarms both Kennedy brothers. From time to time, Jack would call Marilyn and try to soothe her, but his crisis management was not working, and Bobby began distancing himself as well. Over 2 weeks in June and July 1962, Marilyn made 8 calls to Bobby at the Department of Justice, and anytime he refused the call was reason for her to panic. When Bobby came to LA with Ethel for a party at the Lawfords, Marilyn sent her regrets. it wasn't that Ethel's presence was stopping her. Listen to this. Marilyn explains her absence in a fascinating and I think humorous and intelligent way. Listen to this. Unfortunately, I am involved in a freedom ride, protesting the loss of the minority rights belonging to the few remaining earthbound stars. After all we demanded was our right to twinkle. So she's saying, in language that harkens to the civil rights movement and all the things that Bobby cared about, she's saying, I'm involved in my own freedom ride, protesting the loss of rights from a few remaining earthbound stars. So she's saying, I'm a star, I'm losing my capacity, and all I wanted was the right to twinkle. It's a very fun and smart way of declining, I think. Interesting. Desperate to find out what Jack and Bobby were thinking, Marilyn turned to one of her best sources, Mickey Song, the hairdresser that she shared with the Kennedys. Hairdressers heard and saw it all, but Song was a veteran, and he had already been tested and tried by Bobby and Jack. They would feed him pieces of information and watch to see if it showed up in the news, and so they found out that he was loyal to them. So he would not give information to the press, and he was very resistant to Marilyn's questions about whether Jack and Bobby were seeing other women. Don't you want to help me? Marilyn, I don't want to get involved, he said. They're using you just like they're using me. I'm not being used. They're treating me great, he said. Marilyn went to Peter Lawford's wife. This is the brother-in-law to Jack and Bobby. He was married to their sister Pat. She had no illusions about her brothers and gives very similar advice to what Jackie said. She said, forget it. Bobby's still just a little boy. But Marilyn could not forget it. She was inconsolable, and Pat and Peter were increasingly afraid to leave her alone. Her consumption of alcohol and pills was staggering. They let her stay with them for a bit. They took her on vacation with them, and one morning Peter woke up to find Marilyn on their balcony looking down as if she might jump, her face streaked with tears. I'm ugly, she told Peter. I'm worthless. I'm a thing that Jack and Bobby used up. When the studio inevitably fired her from Something's Gotta Give, which was a public humiliation, Marilyn took it as a challenge. She was going to prove to Hollywood and to all the Kennedys, Jackie included, that Marilyn Monroe was irreplaceable. That underneath that white cotton candy hair, there was a strong mind. When you're a failure in Hollywood, Marilyn wrote about that time, it's like starving to death outside a banquet hall with the smells of filet mignon driving you crazy. I lay in bed day after day, not eating, not combing my hair. I felt like an idiot. There was going to be no more luck in my life. The dark star I was born under was going to get darker and darker. These thoughts are coming like waves now, and Marilyn had spent her whole life fighting them, but she had to give survival one more try. She summoned reporters from 3 major magazines. She was 36 years old and at the height of her beauty. The famous photographer Bert Stern was sent to shoot her for Vogue, and he found himself awestruck. She puts on Dior's new look, and she was elegant and evasive and turned toward him with her hand over her mouth as if to stop herself from saying what she wanted to say. Now, I accidentally, when I was marking up my book, on this side of the page, I got a piece of ink on the photo, but the photo is still quite lovely and you can see it there. She looks sad, she looks beautiful, and Maureen Callahan remarks that she looks as if she's stopping herself from saying something. The photographer about that photo shoot wrote, Marilyn had power. She was the wind, a comet shape. She was the light and the goddess and the moon, the the space and the dream, the mystery and the danger, but everything else all together too, including Hollywood and the girl next door that every guy wants to marry. Why couldn't Jack and Bobby see that? 6 weeks later, on August 4th, Bobby Kennedy was in California with his wife and children. He went straight to Marilyn's house. Y'all, I can't even tell y'all how disgusting this is. I think I've shared with you guys. We have 9 children. We have 7 children at home now. So I cannot even fathom when we go on vacation. It's not always a vacation, but at least the first day can feel like a vacation. You're getting somewhere new, you're excited, whatever. You arrive and your husband goes off to see, I mean, not just any woman would be horrifying, but to go see Marilyn Monroe, it's all so wrong. August 4th, 1962. "Where is it?" he yelled at her. "Where the F is it?" He wanted her wiretap. He wanted her recordings of conversations with him and Jack. The FBI and the CIA, Bobby and Jack had discovered, had bugged Marilyn's house and phone line. This was a common method at this time by Hoover and potentially other, 3-letter agencies as well. It's known that Martin Luther King was wiretapped and tons of private citizens were being wiretapped. So the fact that she was in a relationship with these powerful men and being wiretapped isn't fully shocking, but apparently Bobby and Jack didn't know that. And so Bobby's furious. It was a coordinated effort to bring down both Kennedys. Didn't she get that? But Marilyn had no idea what Bobby was talking about. Peter Lawford arrived and tried to play good cop. "We have to know," Bobby said. He was still yelling, but now he's trying to bargain rather than bully. "It's important to the family. We can make any arrangements you want, but we must find it." "Calm down," Lawford told Bobby. "Calm down." Something or someone got pushed into the wall or down to the floor, and then Bobby and Peter left. Here, there's a linking, and chronologically, there's a linking that Bobby came to visit her the morning, and she passes that evening. There is a thump at the end of the recording, and so there's question about what was happening. Was that something being pulled off, pulled out, thrown down, or someone being harmed? We don't know. Hours later, at 7:30 that evening, Marilyn called Peter at home. He and Pat were throwing a party. Bobby would probably come, and they were all still expecting Marilyn. But she would not be coming, now or ever. She had no last words to pass to Bobby. "Say goodbye to Pat," Marilyn said to Peter. "Say goodbye to the president, and goodbye to yourself, because you're a nice guy." Her body was found early next morning in the pre-dawn dark by her housekeeper. She was face down on her bed, nude, with her phone still in her hand. She had been dead for hours. Marilyn Monroe's death was officially ruled a massive barbiturate overdose. She was 36 years old. Whether it was accidental or purposeful or subconscious suicide will never be known. But those who knew and loved Marilyn best, Lawford included, blamed Jack and Bobby Kennedy. Both, along with the Lawfords, were banned from Marilyn's funeral by Joe DiMaggio. Nor did Arthur Miller attend. DiMaggio said if it weren't for her so-called friends, Marilyn would still be alive today. He took charge of all the arrangements, and her funeral service was that of an innocent. Marilyn was laid out in her favorite green Pucci dress with its modest neckline and a miniature bouquet of pink roses in her hands. Judy Garland's rendition of Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz played during her service, lyrics that poignantly epitomized Marilyn's desperation for love and happiness. If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why then, oh why can't I? There's such unfulfilled longing in Marilyn's heart. That's the thing that I was struck with, is just the desires, the deepest desires that she had went unfulfilled. They went unanswered. All she wanted was to be valued and loved. And it's ironic because she represented longing and desire. She represented sexual fulfillment, which is like one aspect of the fulfillment that we all hope to find in a marriage. But she represents all these things, and yet she lacked them. She had unfulfilled longing her whole life. And there's something really ironic about that. I also think there's a real tragedy here, that I believe God gives each one of us an inherent value and dignity because we're made in God's image. It's called the Imago Dei. And we're made in God's image. We have inherent value as individuals. And from my perspective, she took that value that she inherently had, but perhaps never understood that she had, or fully let it sink in that she had, and she traded it for something that others could value or devalue. So she was the greatest sex symbol, or she's devalued and dethroned because Arthur Miller has divorced her and chosen a set crew, or she's this lovely, amazing woman who's about to be with this man with all the power, or she's devalued and not desired because they go away. And that is such a sad and dangerous way for any of us to live. I even feel it with you guys being interested in the channel, and there's this temptation to give permission to someone else to say, oh, you have value, that they can then assign me the real value that I have. And so there's that temptation here even of like, oh, I have value because people are watching these videos or whatever. And I'm having to tell myself, my value comes from the Lord. I'm the same as I was 2 months ago. I'm the same value as I'll have 2 years from now. Nothing is actually controlled by the opinions of others. The thing that gives me value is that I'm the Lord's. I'm created by Him and given inherent value. I think it's a real tragedy when that inherent value that we derive from being unique, one-of-a-kind creatures of an infinitely wise and loving God, that we take that and we trade it for this whatever value that someone else can assign to us from the outside. It's a cheap trade, no matter what we're going for, whether we're wanting to be the smartest or the sexiest or the most powerful or the richest. When we are taking our actual value and trading it for a cheaper version of the thing, it never actually gives us dignity. Okay, what did you guys think about Jean writing this letter? You and Bobby are the new item. Come with him the next time you come. It's interesting to me the way some of the pictures that we've been given of even the Kennedy sisters have embraced this view of old Joe, that just sex is just like, the marriage bond doesn't matter. There's no Catholicism to it. There's no Christianity to it. It's just this cheap, oh, you guys are the new thing. Great, come to our party. I just cannot fathom. There's no love. There's no long-term goodwill from this sister by acting like this, by just inherently embracing the new fling. Maybe there's a self-survival happening. Maybe Jean is just like, I know if I'm going to survive in this family, I got to get with the program. I got to move on and embrace the new girl. But to me, it just felt so cheap and empty. And then, what did you guys think about her battle that was happening of wanting power and to be desired and even stability, like this hoping that maybe Jack will leave Jackie or maybe Bobby will leave Ethel? But the tension with her own intuition and the psychoanalyst saying, you're getting played, this is not in your best long-term interest. So any of those things, I'd love to hear from you guys about Marilyn Monroe. What did you think of her and her relationship with the Kennedy brothers, and how she was ultimately destroyed by those things? Leave it in the comments. You guys have been amazing. I'm so grateful for the community and audience that is finding each other through these videos. I feel really kind of sharpened and delighted when you guys share links and articles and tidbits that you know. It really enriches the whole thing. So I'm really grateful for you guys, and I'm enjoying reading through this book with you. I hope you have a great day. Bye.